It was one of the decisive battles in European history, and now you will learn the details. In the middle of the 15th century, it seemed that the days of Christian Europe were numbered. The greatest stronghold of Eastern Christianity, Constantinople, fell under the blows of the young and ambitious Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed II. His sights were now set on the very heart of Europe, and only one fortress stood in his way, Belgrade. The Ottomans assembled an army unprecedented in its power and size, equipped with the most advanced artillery of the time. Opposing this armada was only a small garrison and a handful of people driven by faith and desperation. This is the story of how David met Goliath at the gates of Europe. Watch the video to the end to find out how a spontaneous attack by peasant militiamen, in violation of the commander-in-chief's orders, led to one of the greatest defeats in the history of the Ottoman Empire and changed the course of history. What if I told you that everything Europe believed in collapsed in a single day? The fall of Constantinople in 1453 was not just a military defeat, it was a psychological blow of colossal force. The 1,000-year-old Byzantine Empire, the shield of the Christian world, ceased to exist, and a wave of horror swept through the royal courts of Europe. It seemed that no force could stop the Ottoman advance. Sultan Mehmed II, known as the Conqueror, was not just a military leader, but a ruler of a new order. He was intelligent, educated, spoke several languages, and possessed inexhaustible resources and an unyielding will. His empire was at the height of its power, absorbing the best technology and military minds of its time. The Ottoman army was the most disciplined and modern military machine in the world. It had never been defeated and was now moving north toward the Danube. In the shadow of this fear, a sense of doom grew. European monarchs were preoccupied with their own feuds and intrigues, unable to unite in the face of a common threat. The Pope called for a new crusade, but his words were lost in a sea of political discord. Against this backdrop, the figure of Sultan Mehmed II became shrouded in legend. He was perceived as an inexorable force, an almost supernatural phenomenon that could not be stopped. He was young, full of energy, and firmly believed in his destiny to carry the banner of his faith to Rome itself. It is this psychological background that makes the Siege of Belgrade such a unique event. The defenders of the fortress were not just fighting an army. They were fighting an all-consuming sense of fear and hopelessness that had gripped the entire continent. Their battle was not only for the stone walls, but also for the very belief that the conqueror could be stopped. They had to prove to themselves and the whole world that hope was not yet lost. It was a battle of spirit against military might. For Mehmed, Belgrade was not just another fortress on the map. He called it the key to Hungary, and thus to all of Central Europe. By taking Belgrade, he opened a direct route to Buda, Vienna, and beyond, to the heart of the Catholic world. Victory at Belgrade was necessary for him not only from a strategic point of view, but also from an ideological one. It was supposed to confirm his status as an invincible ruler and finally break the Europeans' will to resist. That is why he gathered all the best forces of his vast empire under the walls of the city. We would be very interested to hear your opinion. What do you think plays a greater role in war? Technological superiority and numerical strength, or morale and belief in victory? Write about it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Want to know the main geographical secret of Belgrade's impregnability, which made it the key to Europe? The Belgrade Fortress, traditionally called Nandorfa Hervar, White Castle, by the Hungarians, occupied an exceptionally advantageous strategic position that was unparalleled in the region. It stood majestically on a high rocky hill at the confluence of two great navigable rivers, the mighty Danube and the wide Sava, naturally controlling absolutely all river trade and military routes and land roads in the Balkan region. Whoever owned Belgrade controlled the gateway to Europe from the east. This was a geographical axiom, understood by all commanders, making the city the #1 target for any conqueror dreaming of the West, because there was no way around Belgrade. Only through it lay the road for armies to the north to the rich lands of Hungary and further into the heart of Christian Europe, which made its fall or stability a matter of the continent's fate. The fortress consisted of 3 concentric parts of fortifications, nested one inside the other, like Russian nesting dolls. the principle of echelon defense. In the most impregnable center, at the top of the hill, was the upper town with its citadel and the despot's massive stone castle, the last impregnable line of defense in case of a breakthrough. Surrounding it in a ring was the vast lower town, which descended in terraces to the very shore of the wide Danube, and had its own fortified stone port for supplies by water. This multi-layered system gave the defenders 3 lines of defense. Even if the enemy broke through the first wall, they were met by the second and third, exhausting the attackers' forces at each line, which made the capture of the city a series of separate sieges, each of which required new sacrifices in time, exhausting the attackers physically and morally to the limit. This complex 3-level system was surrounded by powerful double stone walls several meters thick with numerous high towers for firing at the enemy. The fortress was built using the latest advances in military fortification of the time, the 15th century, and was rightly considered one of the most powerful and modern in Europe in terms of fortifications. It was engineered by experienced military architects to effectively withstand long sieges lasting many months and repel simultaneous massive attacks from different directions, land and water. Each tower could fire on its neighbor, leaving no dead zones for the enemy, and the thickness of the walls could withstand the blows of heavy siege weapons without being destroyed, which made the fortress virtually impregnable for the technology of the time, with a sufficient garrison and supplies, capable of holding out for years against any army. The experienced Mihai Siladi, a Transylvanian voivode, relative by marriage and loyal associate of the legendary János Hunyadi, was appointed commander of the fortress and commander of the defense. Under his direct command was a permanent garrison of about 7,000 professional soldiers, Hungarians, Serbs, and Germans. These were experienced warriors, hardened by dozens of battles with the Ottomans, who knew every stone in the walls of their citadel and every path in the surrounding area. Discipline was ironclad, morale was high, and their motivation to defend their homeland from invaders made them a dangerous enemy, ready to fight to the death without retreating a single step, because behind them were their homeland and families, and ahead of them was an enemy that would show no mercy. Realizing that a large-scale Ottoman invasion was inevitable after the fall of Constantinople, the prudent Szilágyi did everything possible to thoroughly prepare for a long defense and siege. The fortress walls were further reinforced with earthen ramparts and palisades, and huge reserves of food, grain, meat, wine, drinking water in cisterns, and ammunition. Gunpowder, cannonballs, arrows were methodically created to last for months of autonomy. Every able-bodied inhabitant of the city was mobilized for hard work on the fortifications, digging trenches, delivering stones, repairing walls. The city was transformed into a single military camp, where everyone, without exception, served a single purpose: to withstand the impending storm of the Ottoman invasion, sparing no effort or time in preparation, because the quality of the fortifications determined the fate of everyone. Either the fortress would stand, or everyone would perish or be enslaved. The defenders of the fortress were well aware that there was practically no hope of military assistance from outside in the foreseeable future. The Hungarian kingdom was fatally weakened by internal strife between magnates and a lack of money, while other European powers, Germany, France, Italy, were in no hurry to send their troops to help distant Hungary, as they were busy with their own wars. They were effectively alone against the concentrated military might of the vast Ottoman Empire, which stretched from Persia to the Danube. The isolation was psychologically difficult. The realization that no one would come to their aid, that they could only rely on themselves and the walls around them, created an atmosphere of doom, but also mobilized them to resist to the utmost, because there was no other way out, either victory or death. There was no third option. Despite this painful awareness of isolation, the fighting spirit of the garrison was surprisingly high and unbroken. They clearly understood that they had nowhere to retreat to physically. Behind them was a river and empty land. Behind their weary backs lay their homeland, Hungary and Serbia, their families, wives and children, and their Christian faith against the Muslims, and they were determined to stand to the very end. The last soldier and the last stone. Defending the fortress was not just a military task, but an existential struggle for the survival of civilization. To lose meant not just losing the fortress, but losing everything. Freedom, faith, life, the future of children, so everyone was ready to die but not to surrender, turning Belgrade into a symbol of resistance, where the impossible became possible through strength of spirit and desperation. Belgrade was not just a military strategic object on the map, it was a powerful symbol of resistance for the entire region. For the Hungarians, it was the southern impregnable shield of their kingdom against Ottoman expansion to the north. For the entire Christian world of Europe, it was the last great fortress on the path of the Ottoman flood that swept into Europe after the fall of Constantinople. Its fall would mean an open gate for the Ottomans into the heart of Europe without obstacles. The plains of Hungary, Austria, Germany would lie defenseless before the Sultan's cavalry, capable of reaching the Rhine in weeks without any fortresses to stop them. Therefore, the fate of Belgrade was the fate of Europe. If the fortress stood, the continent would stand. If the fortress fell, civilization would fall under the yataghans of the Janissaries. Mehmed II, the Conqueror, understood perfectly well the strategic importance of this key location for his plans. He knew from experience that as long as impregnable Belgrade stood, blocking the way north, his grandiose dreams of conquering all of Europe and restoring the Roman Empire under the Muslim flag could not physically be realized. The city was a barrier blocking the path to conquest. Therefore, the ambitious Sultan spared no human resources, material resources, or time to remove this accursed obstacle from his victorious path to Europe at any cost. Belgrade became an obsession for Mehmed. He took Constantinople, the greatest city in the world, in 53 days, and was confident that he would take Belgrade just as quickly, not realizing that the defenders of this fortress were ready to fight with the desperation of the doomed, which made them more dangerous than any army with a route of retreat. That is why it was not just another army for a routine siege that was assembled under the walls of this relatively small city, but the entire concentrated military might of the Ottoman Empire at the height of its power. What if I told you an intriguing fact that at a critical moment, the defenders of the besieged fortress had to face and cooperate with not one, but two completely different charismatic leaders whose methods and characters were complete opposites: fire and ice. In the next dramatic chapter, you will learn about the surprising alliance between a professional warrior and a fanatical monk who united against a common enemy. You've definitely never heard of this unique alliance. While the Belgrade garrison was preparing for a deadly battle, two figures were trying to gather forces to help the besieged. These two men were as different as could be, but it was their alliance that determined the outcome of the battle. The first was János Hunyadi, voivode of Transylvania in region of Hungary. He was already over 60 years old and had spent his entire life fighting the Ottomans. He was a living legend, the most experienced and respected commander in the Christian world, whom the Turks called the Devil's Curse. Hunyadi was a pragmatist and a professional soldier. He did not believe in miracles and relied on strict discipline, well-calculated tactics, and well-trained soldiers. However, he was unable to assemble a large army. The Hungarian nobility refused to provide their troops, fearing an increase in his power. All he had at his disposal was his personal guard, a small detachment of mercenaries, and his own funds. He understood that these forces were too small to oppose the Sultan's huge army in open battle. His only chance was to break through to the besieged city. The second savior was a man of a completely different disposition, the Franciscan monk Giovanni da Capistrano. He was 70 years old and frail in build, but possessed incredible strength of spirit and a fiery gift of persuasion. He was one of the greatest preachers of his time, capable of igniting the hearts of thousands of people with a single word. Pope Calixtus III sent Capistrano to Central Europe with a mission to preach a crusade against the Ottomans. The old monk, knowing neither Hungarian nor German, traveled from city to city. His passionate speeches, translated by interpreters, drew huge crowds. While the aristocracy and knighthood remained deaf to the calls, ordinary people responded to Capistrano's sermons. Peasants, artisans, students, minor priests, all of them, inspired by his words, took up whatever they could find and flocked to his banners. This is how a completely unusual army was formed. A crowd of thousands of militiamen. They had almost no weapons or armor, and they knew nothing of military discipline. Their only weapons were their fanatical faith and devotion to their spiritual leader. Thus, two completely different forces were to meet at Belgrade. On the one hand, there was the small professional army of the experienced commander, Hunyadi. On the other, there was the huge but disorganized army of peasant crusaders, led by the fiery preacher Capistrano. Hunyadi, a professional soldier, initially treated the monk's army with contempt, considering it a useless rabble. However, he quickly realized that in the current situation, he would have to use any help available. An alliance between the warrior and the monk, between discipline and faith, was formed. What you are about to learn will change your perception of medieval sieges. At the end of June 1456, the Ottoman army approached the walls of Belgrade. It was a grand and terrifying sight, designed to break the will of the defenders before the battle even began. Tens of thousands of soldiers, including the elite Janissary Corps, set up camp on the plain in front of the city. But Mehmed II's main strength was not his infantry, but his artillery. After the capture of Constantinople, the Sultan relied on the most powerful cannons that could be built. He brought a siege park of more than 200 guns to Belgrade, including several giant mortars. Some of these monstrous cannons were so large that they were cast on site in specially built foundries. Entire teams of engineers and artillerymen were required to operate them. The roar of their shots could be heard for tens of kilometers. The Ottomans were masters of siege warfare. Their engineers immediately set about building siege structures, digging trenches, and installing artillery batteries. The entire camp was organized with impeccable precision, demonstrating the power and order of the imperial machine. The Sultan was so confident of victory that he did not even consider the possibility of failure. He pitched his tent on a safe but well-visible hill from where he intended to personally watch the fall of the city. He wanted to enjoy the triumph that would open the way to Europe for him. In early July, continuous artillery bombardment began. Day and night, giant stone and metal shells crashed into the walls of Belgrade. The roar had not only a devastating physical effect, but also exerted powerful psychological pressure on the besieged. The defenders of the fortress could only watch helplessly as their mighty walls, considered impregnable, slowly turned to ruins under a hail of cannonballs. Their own cannons were too small to inflict serious damage on the Ottoman batteries. It seemed that the fall of the city was only a matter of time. The walls cracked and crumbled, the towers collapsed, turning into piles of rubble. The Ottomans methodically, inch by inch, destroyed the outer line of defense. They were preparing the ground for a decisive assault, which according to their calculations was to be the final chord of the siege. Risking their lives, the defenders tried to fill the largest gaps with sacks of earth and logs under the cover of night. But during the day, the bombardment resumed with renewed vigor, nullifying all their efforts. Hope faded with each passing day. But the defenders had one trump card, the Danube River. As long as they controlled the river, they could receive reinforcements and supplies. Ready to find out how a small river fleet challenged the entire naval power of the Ottomans? Control of the Danube was key to the entire siege. Mehmed II understood this and ordered his river flotilla, consisting of about 200 ships, to completely block the river above and below Belgrade. These ships were connected by chains, creating an impenetrable barrier. Yunus Hunyadi, who had gathered his forces north of Belgrade, also realized that without breaking this blockade, the city was doomed. He had about 200 small ships, inferior to the Ottomans in size and armament. However, his men were experienced river fighters, accustomed to the currents and shoals of the Danube. On July 14, 1456, Hunyadi decided on a desperate attack. His flotilla moved downstream, straight towards the Ottoman blockade. It was a daring and risky operation, the success of which depended on speed and coordination. On board his ships were not only professional soldiers, but also detachments of Capistrano's crusaders. These men may not have been skilled warriors, but their determination was unshakable. They were eager to fight to help their brothers in faith in the besieged city. The Hungarian flotilla rammed into the Ottoman line at full speed. A fierce battle began on the water. The ships collided side by side, and the battle escalated into hundreds of separate hand-to-hand combats on the decks. Hunyadi used his knowledge of the river and his cunning. His smaller, more maneuverable ships surrounded the unwieldy Ottoman galleys, showering their crews with arrows and bullets. The defenders of Belgrade also opened fire on the Ottoman fleet from their cannons on the fortress walls. Support from the banks of the Sava River, where Hunyadi had stationed some of his troops in advance, played a key role. They fired accurately at the Ottoman ships, causing confusion in their ranks. The Ottoman sailors found themselves under crossfire from two sides and from the river. In the heat of battle, Hunyadi personally led a boarding attack on the Ottoman flagship. His example inspired the soldiers, and they fought with redoubled fury. After several hours of fierce fighting, the Ottoman fleet faltered and began to retreat. Breaking the blockade was the first major victory for the Christian forces. The way to Belgrade by water was open. Hunyadi was able to transport his troops and much-needed supplies to the city, significantly strengthening the garrison. This victory had enormous moral significance. It showed the defenders that they had not been abandoned and that the Ottoman machine could be defeated. Morale in the city rose sharply, while in the Sultan's camp, on the contrary, the first signs of doubt appeared. What if I told you that the greatest victory began with complete defeat? Encouraged by the breakthrough of the blockade, but angered by the failure on the river, Mehmed II ordered the artillery bombardment to be intensified to the limit. He was determined to reduce the city walls to dust, whatever the cost. During the week following the river battle, a fiery storm of unprecedented force descended upon Belgrade. The Ottoman cannons fired continuously. The cannonade did not cease day or night, giving the defenders not a moment's rest. Under this hurricane of fire, the outer walls of the city, especially in the lower, riverside part, began to give way. Huge sections of the fortifications collapsed, forming several wide breaches. The fortress, which had seemed impregnable, was now open to assault. The defenders suffered heavy losses from the continuous bombardment. The men were physically and morally exhausted. The constant roar, the dust from the ruined walls, and the realization that the main line of defense had fallen weighed heavily on their minds. Hunyadi and Siladi understood that a decisive assault was inevitable. They ordered all forces to withdraw from the destroyed outer walls and concentrate on defending the upper town and the castle. The lower town was practically abandoned, and it was decided to turn it into a deadly trap for the attackers. Ambushes were set up in the surviving buildings of the lower town. The narrow streets were blocked with barricades. The defenders prepared to meet the enemy in hand-to-hand combat, where the numerical superiority of the Ottomans would not be so noticeable. On July 21st, 1456, after a powerful artillery barrage, Mehmed II gave the order to begin the general assault. He was confident that the broken and exhausted defenders would not be able to offer serious resistance. Tens of thousands of Ottoman soldiers rushed toward the breaches in the walls. At the forefront were the empire's best forces, the Janissaries. These were professional warriors, trained for war from childhood. Wave after wave, they poured into the ruined lower city, sweeping away everything in their path. It seemed that the outcome of the battle was a foregone conclusion. Ottoman banners were already flying on the towers of the lower city. The Sultan, watching the assault from his hill, anticipated a quick victory. The defenders fought desperately for every street, every house, but the forces were too unequal. Under the pressure of the superior enemy forces, they slowly retreated to their last line of defense, the walls of the upper city. What actions did the defenders take at the most critical moment of the battle? In the next chapter, you will learn how one desperate sortie changed everything. The assault, which began on the evening of July 21st, continued throughout the night. The Janissaries, having broken through to the lower town, did not stop there. Their main target was the castle, the heart of the entire defense, where the command headed by Hunyadi was located. The battle was incredibly fierce. The narrow streets and ruins of houses became an arena for thousands of desperate fights. The defenders, knowing every corner, used this advantage to set up ambushes and sudden counterattacks. However, the Janissaries' onslaught was too strong. Step by step, they advanced, overcoming the barricades and resistance of the defenders. By midnight, they had managed to break through to the walls of the upper town and even hoist the Sultan's banner on one of the towers. This was a critical moment in the entire siege. Seeing the banner on the wall, many Ottoman soldiers decided that the city had fallen and rushed to plunder the lower town. This caused some confusion in their ranks and slowed down the pace of the attack. At the same time, Hunyadi was preparing his main counterattack. He ordered everything that could burn to be thrown from the walls onto the heads of the attacking janissaries. Wood soaked in resin and sulfur, torches, barrels of flammable mixture. The castle walls turned into a fiery barrier. The defenders, locked in the upper town, fought with the energy of despair. They understood that this was their last chance. Among them was the old monk Capistrano, who, with a cross in his hand, moved from one unit to another, inspiring the fighters and urging them not to give up. The fiercest fighting took place at the gates leading to the upper town. The janissaries tried several times to break through with battering rams, but each time their attacks were repelled. Hunyadi personally commanded the defense, appearing in the most dangerous areas. By dawn, the assault began to run out of steam. The janissaries, who had fought all night without a break, were exhausted. They had suffered heavy losses in street fighting and from fire from the walls. Despite this, they still held the lower town and several towers on the walls of the upper town. The defenders' situation remained critical. Both sides were at the limit of their strength, and the outcome of the battle was to be decided in the coming hours. The morning of July 22nd dawned. A temporary lull hung over the ruined city. Hunyadi, realizing that his exhausted soldiers would not withstand another such assault, gave a strict order. Everyone was to remain behind the walls of the upper town and prepare for defense. On the morning of July 22nd, after a sleepless night of fierce fighting, a tense calm reigned among the defenders. János Hunyadi, an experienced commander, understood that his troops were exhausted. He gave a clear and unambiguous order. No one was to leave their shelters behind the walls of the upper town, and everyone was to prepare to repel the next attack. However, events took a completely unexpected turn. A small group of crusaders from Capistrano's army, ignoring the order, emerged from behind the fortifications. They began firing arrows at the Ottoman posts in the captured lower town. The Ottomans responded, and a firefight ensued. More and more groups of crusaders began to come out from behind the walls to help their comrades. They acted spontaneously without any plan or command. Seeing this, Giovanni da Capistrano tried to intervene and bring his men back to the fortress. But finding himself among them, the old monk was swept up in the general enthusiasm. Instead of stopping them, he himself led this spontaneous attack. With the cry, "The Lord who created the beginning will take care of the end." Capistrano, holding a cross above his head, led thousands of his followers behind him. It was not a tactical operation, but an act of pure faith. A huge, disorganized crowd of peasants and artisans poured out of the gates and straight into the positions of the elite Ottoman troops. János Hunyadi, watching the scene from the castle walls, was horrified. He saw poorly armed militiamen running to their certain death, disobeying his orders and destroying his entire defense plan. Attempts to stop them were futile. The avalanche could not be held back. This attack was so unexpected and irrational that at first it completely confused the Ottomans. They could not believe that a handful of ragged men had decided to attack their fortified positions in the camp. They took it for the beginning of a full-scale planned sortie. Seeing that the situation was out of control, Hunyadi made the only correct decision in this situation. Since the attack could not be stopped, it had to be led and directed. He could not abandon the Crusaders to their fate. He ordered his heavy cavalry and best infantry units to support the sortie. What began as an act of insubordination turned into a total counterattack by all Christian forces. It was a moment when the logic of war gave way to desperate audacity. The unexpected and fierce attack by the Crusaders, supported by the strike of Hunyadi's professional troops, took the Ottoman army by surprise. The Sipahis, the Ottoman cavalrymen in the camp, were not ready for battle and did not have time to mount their horses. Panic broke out in their ranks. While the main Ottoman forces were recovering, the Crusaders of Capistrano, ignoring the resistance, rushed towards their main target, the Ottoman artillery battery. These were the very same giant cannons that had been destroying the walls of their city for several weeks. They were driven by the desire to destroy the source of their suffering. Without proper protection, the artillerymen were unable to offer serious resistance. The Crusaders stormed the positions, and soon the Sultan's greatest weapon was captured. This was the decisive turning point of the battle. Mehmed II, watching the events unfold from his hill, could not believe his eyes. His victorious army, which had just been on the verge of triumph, was now retreating in disorder under the onslaught of a crowd of peasants. He personally rushed into the thick of the battle, trying to stop the retreat and organize a defense. The Sultan and his personal Janissary guard joined the fight, and he even managed to halt the advance of the Hungarian knights for a while. However, in the confusion of battle, he was struck. This further demoralized his troops. Seeing that the Sultan had left the battlefield and the artillery had been captured, the Ottoman army finally lost control. Panic became widespread. What had been an army turned into an uncontrollable crowd fleeing for their lives. Hunyadi's troops pursued the retreating enemy, preventing them from regrouping. By the evening of July 22nd, the Ottoman camp had been completely captured. The victors took enormous spoils, tents, weapons, supplies, and the entire treasury of the Ottoman army. At night, under cover of darkness, the remnants of Mehmed II's once great army retreated in complete disorder from the walls of Belgrade. The siege, which had lasted almost 2 months, ended in a crushing and unimaginable defeat for the Ottomans. The young Sultan, who had never lost a battle before, was defeated. The losses of the Ottoman army were enormous. Thousands of soldiers were left lying on the battlefield and in the abandoned camp. The defeat was not only military, but also a colossal blow to the reputation of the invincible conqueror. The victory of the defenders of Belgrade was complete and unconditional. A small garrison and an army of militiamen were able not only to defend the city, but also to defeat the best forces of the most powerful empire in the world. News of the incredible victory at Belgrade spread throughout Europe, causing widespread jubilation. In Rome, where people were already preparing for the worst, the news was greeted with festive services. It seemed that the Ottoman threat hanging over the continent had finally receded. Pope Calixtus III, who had previously issued a bull calling for prayers for the defenders of Belgrade, turned this call into a celebration. He ordered that bells be rung every day at noon in all Catholic churches in honor of this victory. This tradition, known as the noon bell, has been preserved in many places to this day. The victory at Belgrade was of enormous strategic importance. It halted the Ottoman Empire's advance into Europe for 70 years. Hungary was saved, and Mehmed II's plans to conquer the West were thwarted. However, the price of this victory was high. In the abandoned Ottoman camp, among the huge number of dead, an epidemic quickly spread. The disease also spread to the victor's camp. Its first victim was one of the main heroes of the battle, János Hunyadi. The great commander, whom the Ottoman armies could not defeat, died in his tent 3 weeks after his greatest triumph. His passing was an irreparable loss for the entire Christian world. Shortly after him, the second hero, Giovanni da Capistrano, also passed away. The 70-year-old monk, whose ardent faith had inspired thousands of people to fight, also fell victim to the epidemic. Two leaders, so different but united by a common goal, met their ends shortly after their joint victory. Despite the tragic ending for its heroes, the siege of Belgrade in 1456 went down in history. It became a symbol of how faith, courage, and self-sacrifice can overcome a seemingly invincible force. It was a triumph of spirit over matter. This battle showed that even the most perfect military machine can be vulnerable. It gave Europe a much-needed respite and hope. The threat did not disappear, but it was stopped at the gates of the continent. The legacy of the Battle of Belgrade is not only the cities and kingdoms that were saved. Above all, it is a lesson that the course of history is not only determined by great armies and emperors. Sometimes it is changed by a handful of brave people who are ready to stand their ground to the end. Their feat reminds us that even in the darkest times, there is always room for hope, and that the most incredible victories are often born out of the most desperate situations. The story of the defenders of Belgrade is a vivid confirmation of this. We conclude our story about the legendary siege of Belgrade, an event that is rightly considered one of the greatest military miracles in history. It is a story of how the alliance of an experienced commander and a holy preacher, an army of professionals and a crowd of peasants, managed to stop an invincible conqueror. This battle is a vivid example of how not only numbers and technology play a decisive role in war, but also unyielding will, tactical ingenuity, and unity in the face of a common threat. The defenders of Belgrade lost almost all local battles, but won the main battle, defending not only their city, but also the future of all Europe. What other great battles or historical events would you like to see in our next issues? Suggest your topics in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new fascinating stories from the past.